The ship moved slowly through the darkness of space. It was called the Evergreen, and it carried 2,400 human souls across the stars. There were scientists and diplomats on board. There were families with young children. There were dreamers who believed that humanity could find its place among the older species of the SE. Captain Kong Tae-ho stood on the bridge and watched the stars pass by. He was 53 years old. His hair had turned gray from years of stress. For his entire career, he had done one thing above all else. He had smiled. He had smiled when alien officials called humans primitive. He had smiled when other species refused to shake human hands because they found human skin disgusting. He had smiled through every insult, every humiliation, every reminder that humanity was nothing in the eyes of the galaxy. 300 years ago, humans had reached the stars. They had expected wonder. They had expected friendship. Instead, they found the Galactic Concord. 12 ancient species controlled everything. They had been traveling between stars for 50,000 years. To them, humans were like children. Worse than children, they were useful animals that could follow simple orders. Earth was given membership in the Concord, but it meant nothing. Humans were classified as a Tier 7 civilization. This was the lowest rank possible. They could not build warships. They could not develop weapons beyond what was needed to protect their own planet. They had no voice in the High Council where all important decisions were made. They could work. They could serve. They could be quiet. That was all. Tae-ho had accepted this reality long ago. He told himself that patience was wisdom. He told himself that one day things would change. He told himself many lies to sleep at night. The communication screen flickered. Lieutenant Park Yuna turned in her chair. She was young, only 28, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was the ship's communication officer, and she was very good at her job. "Captain," she said, "we are receiving a message from the Veluxy Dominion. They are ordering us to stop." Tae-ho felt his stomach grow cold. The Veluxy were one of the most powerful species in the Concord. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. They believed themselves to be superior to all other life forms. They especially hated humans. "What reason do they give?" Tae-ho asked. "They say we are accused of biological contamination on Praxis 6. They say we must submit to inspection." Tae-ho closed his eyes. They had visited Praxis 6 3 months ago. It was a mining colony. The Evergreen had delivered medical supplies and left. There had been no contamination. There had been no problems. But the Veluxy did not need real reasons. They only needed excuses. "Tell them we will cooperate fully," Tae-ho said. Within the hour, Veluxy warships surrounded the Evergreen. Their vessels were massive, covered in weapons that could destroy a planet. The Evergreen had no weapons at all. It was a diplomatic ship. It had been built for peace. The Veluxy soldiers came aboard. There were hundreds of them, armed with plasma rifles that glowed with deadly blue light. Their commander was named Voreth. He was tall, even for his species, and his eyes held nothing but contempt. "All humans will gather in the main cargo bay," Voreth announced. "You will be inspected for contamination. Anyone who resists will be executed." Tae-ho ordered his people to obey. What else could he do? They had no weapons. They had no way to fight. They had no choice. The 2,400 humans gathered in the cargo bay. Families held their children close. Scientists stood with their heads bowed. Diplomats who had spent their lives building bridges now stood in silence, waiting for whatever would come. Yuna was ordered to remain on the bridge. She was told to watch. She was told to record everything. She did not understand why until it was too late. Voreth walked through the crowd of humans. He looked at them like a farmer looks at animals before slaughter. Then he raised his hand. "The contamination is confirmed," he said. "Decontamination will now begin." The Veluxy soldiers opened fire. They did not aim for threats. They did not aim for weapons. There were no threats. There were no weapons. They simply fired into the crowd. The screams filled the cargo bay. Parents threw themselves over their children. Scientists tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The doors were sealed. The soldiers surrounded them on all sides. Yuna watched from the bridge. The screen showed everything. She saw a mother holding her baby, trying to shield it with her own body. She saw an old man fall to his knees and pray. She saw a young boy, no more than 10 years old, looking up at the soldiers with confusion in his eyes. He did not understand. He would never understand. He was dead before he could even scream. It took 12 minutes. When it was over, 847 people lay dead on the cargo bay floor. Blood covered everything. The survivors, those who had somehow been missed or only wounded, crawled among the bodies of their friends and families. Voreth looked directly at the camera. He knew Yuna was watching. He smiled. "This is decontamination," he said. "This is what happens when lesser species forget their place. Broadcast this message to Earth. Let them see what human defiance earns." On the bridge, Yuna's hand shook. Tears ran down her face. But beneath the tears, something else was growing. Something dark. Something that had been sleeping in humanity for a very long time. Captain Tejo was dragged onto the bridge. He was bleeding from a wound on his head. Soldiers forced him to his knees beside Yuna. "Send the message," Voreth ordered. "Tell your planet what you have witnessed." Yuna looked at her captain. She looked at the blood on his face. She looked at the smile on Voreth's face. And she felt something break inside her. Not her spirit. Her fear. She turned to the console and began the transmission. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "This is the Evergreen. The Veluxy Dominion has murdered 847 of our people. They called it decontamination. They want you to be afraid." She paused. Then she looked directly at Voreth. "But I think they have made a very big mistake." Voreth laughed. He found this amusing. A small human female threatening him. It was like a mouse threatening a lion. "What mistake?" he asked. Yuna smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something others did not. "You think humanity is weak because we have been quiet? You think we are lambs because we have not fought back? But you do not know our history. You do not know what we did to each other before we reached the stars? You do not know what sleeps inside us." Ora stopped laughing. "You have awakened something," Yuna continued, "and you will regret it. Every species in this galaxy will remember this day. Not because of what you did to us, but because of what we are about to do to you." The message was sent. Earth received it 14 hours later, and everything changed. The message reached Earth at 3:47 in the morning. Within minutes, it spread to every continent. Within hours, every human colony across the stars had seen it. The video of the massacre played on every screen. The screams of dying children echoed in every home. And something happened that the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity went silent. No angry protests. No demands for justice. No diplomatic messages asking for explanations. Just silence. A cold, deep, terrible silence. In the capital city of the United Terran Council, President Nohana sat alone in her office. She was 61 years old, with white hair and calm eyes. She had been a diplomat for 40 years. She had spent her whole life believing in peace. She had shaken hands with aliens who despised her. She had smiled through countless insults. She had believed, truly believed, that patience would lead to a better future. Now, she watched the video of 847 people dying. She watched a mother try to protect her baby. She watched the baby die anyway. She watched Voreth smile at the camera. Something broke inside her. Something that had been holding humanity back for 300 years. The council chamber filled with leaders from every nation on Earth. They argued about responses, sanctions, diplomatic protests. Emergency meetings with the Galactic Concord. The same empty words that had been spoken for centuries. Hannah stood up. The room fell silent. "For 300 years, she said, her voice quiet but clear, "we have followed their rules. We have been patient. We have been peaceful. We have smiled while they called us animals. And today, they murdered our children and called it cleaning." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. It looked ordinary. It was the most dangerous object in the room. "Before I became president, I learned a secret. a secret that only a handful of people in each generation have known. Our founders, the ones who first reached the stars, they understood something important. They saw how the galaxy treated new species. They knew that one day we would need to defend ourselves. She placed the chip on the table. Project Sleeping Dragon. For 300 years, while we smiled and bowed, we have been building. Not patrol ships. Not rescue vessels. Something else entirely. Admiral Baek Soonjo was 73 years old. He had commanded Earth's official fleet for 20 years. Small ships. Weak weapons. Enough to chase pirates and rescue stranded vessels. Nothing that could threaten anyone. But he also knew the secret. How many ships? One of the council members asked. Sung-ho stood up slowly. His old bones ached, but his eyes were sharp. Under the oceans of Earth, there are shipyards that have been building in secret since the day we joined the Concorde. Under the ice of Europa, we have weapons factories that produce technology the galaxy has never seen. In the asteroid fields, hidden behind false rocks and fake mining operations, we have been training soldiers for a war we hoped would never come. He paused. We have 4,700 warships. True warships. Not the toys they allowed us to have. Dreadnoughts that are larger than anything the Concorde has ever built. Weapons that break the rules of physics they think they understand. And crews who have been training for this moment their entire lives. The room was silent. For a long moment, nobody could speak. Why did we never use them? Someone asked. Hannah answered. Because we remembered our own history. We remembered the wars we fought against each other. We knew what we were capable of. We hoped we would never have to become that again. She looked at the screen, where the video of the massacre still played silently. But they gave us no choice. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, the water began to move. Massive doors that had been hidden for centuries slowly opened. From the darkness, ships began to rise. They were black as night and covered in weapons. They moved without sound, without heat, without any sign that they existed until they wanted to be seen. Commander Shin Dae-jun stood on the bridge of the Unyielding. It was the first true battleship humanity had ever built. His crew of 800 came from every nation on Earth. They had trained in secret facilities. They had studied wars that humans had fought against each other for 10,000 years. They knew tactics that the galaxy had never seen. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Gomina, pulled up the sensor display. All ships are reporting ready, Commander, she said. The fleet is awake. Dae-jun looked at the crew around him. Young faces. Old faces. Men and women who had dedicated their lives to a war they hoped would never happen. Now it was here. The galaxy has made a mistake, he said. They looked at 300 years of silence and thought we were weak. They thought we had accepted our place. They thought we were tame. He pulled up an image of the Veluxi homeworld on the main screen. Oh, we were never tame. We were never weak. We were patient. But patience has limits. And they found ours. Across human space, similar scenes played out. On hidden bases throughout the solar system, soldiers received their orders. Scientists powered up weapons that had only been tested in secret. Pilots climbed into fighters that officially did not exist. Admiral Sung-ho took command of the flagship, the Eternal Vengeance. It was the largest ship humanity had ever built. 5 kilometers long, covered in weapons that could crack planets open. It had been built in secret over 80 years, piece by piece, hidden from every Concorde inspection. His first order was simple. All ships set course for Veluxi space. Maximum speed. The fleet moved through space like ghosts. They used pathways that the Concorde did not know existed. They traveled through folds in reality that human scientists had discovered and kept hidden. What should have taken months took days. The Veluxi had no warning. They were celebrating their victory over the Evergreen. They were laughing at the message they had sent to Earth. They expected humans to cry and beg for forgiveness instead. They received a single transmission from the approaching human fleet. To the Veluxi Dominion. You murdered 847 innocent humans and called it decontamination. You broadcast their deaths as a warning. You wanted us to be afraid? Admiral Sunko's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You're not afraid. We were never afraid. We were simply waiting to see if the galaxy deserved mercy. You have given us your answer." On the Veluxy homeworld, alarm systems began to scream. Sensors detected thousands of ships appearing from nowhere. Ships that were larger and more powerful than anything in their fleet. Ships that should not exist. The galaxy called humans weak. The galaxy called humans primitive. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake, and now the wolves were awake, the Veluxy. Dominion had ruled 47 star systems for 8,000 years. Their fleet was considered the third most powerful in the galaxy. They had fought wars against dozens of species and had never lost. Their homeworld was protected by 2,000 warships and defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. The Battle of Veluxy Prime lasted 9 hours when the human fleet arrived. The Veluxy commanders laughed. Yes, there were many human ships. Yes, they were surprisingly large. But the Veluxy had numbers. They had experience. They had 8,000 years of military tradition. They did not understand what they were facing, pilot. Osora was 24 years old. She had trained in simulators for 6 years, but she had never seen real combat until that morning. Her fighter was small and fast, designed to slip through enemy defenses and strike at weak points. She was scared. Her hands were shaking. But she thought about the video she'd watched. She thought about the children dying in the cargo bay. And her fear turned into something else. "All fighters begin attack, run," her squadron leader ordered. Sora pushed her engines to full power. Around her, 500 fighters moved like a swarm of angry insects. The Veluxy expected them to form neat lines. They expected organized attacks that followed the rules of civilized warfare. Humans did not fight like the elder species. The fighters came from every direction at once. They moved in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. They targeted weak points that Veluxy engineers thought were well hidden. They sacrificed themselves to create openings for their friends. The Veluxy had studied war for 8,000 years. Humans had studied war for 10,000 years, and all of it against each other. Every trick, every trap, every betrayal that one human had ever used against another. Veluxy were seeing it all at once. Sora's fighter slipped through a gap in the enemy formation. A Veluxy cruiser filled her targeting screen. She fired her missiles and watched them strike the ship's reactor core. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. "Target destroyed," she reported. "Nice shot," her squadron leader replied. "Move to Sector 7. More targets there." By noon, Sora had destroyed 17 enemy ships. She was not special. She was not the best pilot in the fleet. She was average. And average humans were cutting through the Veluxy fleet like fire through paper. On the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance, Admiral Beek Sung-ho watched the battle unfold. The Veluxy were breaking. Their neat formations had fallen apart. Their commanders were screaming contradictory orders. They had never faced an enemy like this. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the enemy flagship is trying to retreat. Do not let them. Block all escape routes." The human dreadnoughts moved to surround the Veluxy fleet. Their weapons fired in perfect coordination. Each shot was planned. Each target was chosen carefully. The Veluxy were not just losing, they were being destroyed with surgical precision. Commander Vorith, the one who had ordered the massacre on the Evergreen, watched from his ship as his fleet burned around him. He could not understand what was happening. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to be primitive. How could they have ships like this? How could they fight like this? He opened a communication channel to the human flagship. "This is Commander Vorith of the Veluxy Dominion. We request a ceasefire to discuss terms of surrender." Sung-ho's face appeared on the screen. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. "Commander Vorith, I recognize your name. You ordered the murder of 847 civilians on the Evergreen. You called it decontamination." Vorith felt cold fear crawling up his spine. That was a necessary action. Your people had violated Concord regulations. We were within our rights. You killed children, Sung Ho interrupted. You killed mothers holding their babies. You smiled while you did it. And you broadcast it across the galaxy as entertainment. We can negotiate. We can pay reparations. We can know. The word was simple, final, absolute. In human history, Sun Go continued, we have a concept called justice. When someone commits a crime, they must face consequences. Not negotiations. Not payments. Consequences. What do you want? Voreth whispered. I want you to understand something. For 300 years, we were patient. We smiled through your insults. We endured your contempt. We did this because we remembered our own wars. We knew what we were capable of, and we were afraid of ourselves. Sung Ho leaned forward. You took our fear away. You showed us that mercy was weakness in your eyes. You showed us that peace was impossible with species like yours. And now you will learn what humans do when we stop being afraid. The communication ended. The human fleet surrounded Veluxy Prime. 12 dreadnoughts took position above the planet's major cities. Their weapons, designed in secret laboratories and tested in hidden facilities, began to charge. On the planet below, billions of Veluxy looked up at the sky. They saw the human ships blocking out the stars. They heard the evacuation alarms screaming. But there was nowhere to go. The human fleet had closed every escape route. The first shots fell like rain. Humanity did not destroy everything. They were precise. They targeted military bases, government buildings, weapons factories, shipyards. They destroyed the Veluxy ability to make war. They burned the symbols of Veluxy power until nothing remained but ash. But they let the civilians live. They opened corridors for evacuation ships. They allowed medical vessels to land and treat the wounded. Because humans were not monsters. They had simply stopped being prey. When it was over, the Veluxy Dominion existed only in name. Their fleet was gone. Their military was destroyed. Their empire, built over 8,000 years, had fallen in 9 hours. Sung Ho broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. Every species, every world, every ship. The Veluxy murdered our children and called it cleaning. Today, they learned the consequences. To every species watching, we did not want this war. We wanted peace. We wanted friendship. But we will not be slaughtered like animals. He paused. If you treat humanity with respect, you will find no better friends in the galaxy. If you treat us with cruelty, you will find no worse enemies. The choice is yours. On the bridge of the Unyielding, Commander Shin Daejeon stood beside Lieutenant Gomina. They watched the burning remains of the Veluxy fleet drift through space. Do you think the other species will listen? Mina asked. Daejeon shook his head. No. They will try to destroy us. 12 elder species will not accept what we have done today. Then what do we do? Daejeon smiled. It was not a happy smile. We show them what happens to the next ones who try. The destruction of the Veluxy Dominion sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For 50,000 years, the Galactic Concord had controlled known space. 12 elder species had decided the fate of all others. They had never imagined that a Tier 7 civilization, species they had treated like useful animals, could destroy one of their strongest members in 9 hours. Emergency sessions were called. Fleet commanders gathered. For the first time in galactic history, the remaining 11 species of the Concord agreed to unite against a single enemy. They would combine their forces. They would crush humanity before this disease of rebellion could spread. The Concord. Warfleet numbered over 50,000 ships. It was the largest military force ever assembled. Species that had been rivals for millennia now stood side by side. They had one goal, the complete destruction of human civilization. But humanity did not wait for them to attack. General Yoon Kinam led the ground. Assault on Threxus 4. This was the Concord's primary shipyard. Where most of their warships were built, if it fell, the enemy's ability to replace their losses would be crippled. Keenum was 52 years old. with a scarred face and hard eyes. He had spent 30 years training for a war he hoped would never come. Now he led 40,000 soldiers across an alien world, fighting enemies that towered over humans and had weapons that could melt steel. His soldiers moved through enemy lines like ghosts. They did not fight the way the Concord expected. They used tricks and traps. They attacked at night. They pretended to retreat, then struck from behind. They did things that the elder species considered dishonorable. Humans had no concept of honorable war. They only had survival. A captured Concord general was brought before Keenam after one particularly bloody battle. The alien was twice the size of any human, with scales that could stop bullets and claws that could tear through armor. But his eyes were filled with confusion and fear. "You fight like animals," the general gasped. Keenam looked at him coldly. "Animals fight to survive. We fight to win. There is a difference." While the ground war raged across dozens of worlds, Dr. Jang Yunbai made a discovery that would change everything. EU and Bai was humanity's leading expert on alien biology and culture. When human forces captured a Concord archive on the planet Nexus 7, she was called in to examine the records. What she found made her blood run cold. The archives contained files on every species the Concord had ever encountered, and there was a special section dedicated to humanity. The files were 300 years old, dated to the time when humans first reached the stars. They contained detailed analysis of human history. Every war, every genocide, every act of cruelty that humans had committed against each other. The Concord had studied all of it, and they had been terrified. Species classification. Human, the report began. Threat assessment. Maximum. The humans have demonstrated an unparalleled capacity for both creation and destruction. In their short history, they have nearly destroyed themselves multiple times through warfare. They have developed weapons capable of ending their own civilization. They have committed acts of cruelty against their own kind that exceed anything in Concord records. Double quotes, EUN-by kept reading. Recommendation: immediate containment. The humans must not be allowed to develop military technology. They must not be allowed to understand their own potential. They must be kept in a state of dependence until they can be safely controlled or eliminated. If the humans ever realize what they are capable of, they will become the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. The protection that humanity had received for 300 years was never about guidance. It was never about helping a young species grow. It was a cage. The Concord had seen what humans did to each other and decided that such a species must never be allowed to become powerful. They had crippled human development on purpose. They had kept humanity weak because they were afraid of what would happen if humans became strong. EUN-by sent the files to Earth. Within hours, every human in the galaxy knew the truth. They had not been protected. They had been prisoners. President Nohana broadcast a message to all human forces. For 300 years, we blamed ourselves. We thought we were not good enough. We thought we needed to prove ourselves worthy of the galaxy's respect. But the truth is different. They knew from the beginning what we could become. They feared us. They caged us. And they smiled while they did it. Her voice grew hard. No more. We are not prisoners. We are not pets. We are humanity. And we will never be caged again. The war escalated. Human fleets struck at targets across Concord space. They moved faster than enemy commanders could react. They appeared from nowhere and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They seemed to be everywhere at once, but something unexpected began to happen. The Galactic Concord had not only oppressed humanity. For 50,000 years, they had dominated hundreds of species. They had taken resources. They had forced weaker civilizations to serve them. They had created an empire built on fear and exploitation. Now those oppressed species watched as humans did the impossible. They watched as the mighty Concord trembled before creatures they had called primitive, and they began to hope. On the planet Kethri, species that had been enslaved for 2,000 years saw their Concord masters flee from approaching human ships. They looked at each other with wide eyes. If the humans could fight back, perhaps they could too. on the moon of Vera 3. Workers in Concord mines heard rumors of human victories. They whispered to each other in the darkness. They began to hide weapons. They began to plan. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out again and again. Species that had given up hope for generations suddenly found it again. Not because humans told them to rebel, but because humans showed them that rebellion was possible. Admiral Beek Song-ho received reports of uprisings on dozens of worlds. Species were fighting their Concord overlords. They were asking for human help. They were calling humans not conquerors, but liberators. "We did not expect this," Sung-ho said to Commander Shin Dae-jun. Dae-jun nodded. "We were so focused on what they did to us that we forgot what they did to others. The question is, what do we do now? We could use these rebellions to our advantage. Let them fight while we watch." Dae-jun shook his head. "No, we are not the Concord. If we use these species as tools and throw them away, we become exactly what we are fighting against." Sun-ho looked at the young commander for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You're right. Send aid to every species that asks for it. Weapons, ships, training, whatever they need. And what do we ask for in return? Nothing. We help them because it is the right thing to do. And because when this war is over, we want to build something better than what came before." The war was not just about revenge anymore. It had become something bigger. Something that could change the galaxy forever. The war lasted 18 months. By its end, the Galactic Concord. 12 species that had dominated known space for 50,000 years had been completely shattered. 7 species surrendered. They had seen what happened to those who fought to the end, and they chose survival over pride. Their leaders signed treaties that stripped them of their empires but allowed their people to live. 3 species were conquered. They had refused to surrender even when their fleets were destroyed and their homeworlds surrounded. They had chosen to fight until they had nothing left to fight with. Humanity gave them no glory in death. They simply removed their ability to make war ever again. 2 species fled. They gathered what ships they could and disappeared into unknown regions of space. Perhaps they would return one day. Perhaps they would spend eternity running. Either way, they were no longer a TH. Reet, the galaxy that had existed for 50,000 years, was gone. Something new was being born. And humanity had to decide what that something would be. President Nohana had died 6 months into the war. A Concord assassination attempt had struck the Earth's capital. Hannah had been killed, along with hundreds of others. Her last words, recorded by a surviving aide, were simple: "Do not let my death make us into monsters." The new president was a younger woman named Beek Gi-on. She was Sung-ho's niece, but she had earned her position through skill and dedication, not family connections. She understood something important. Winning the war was only the beginning. Building the peace would be much harder. The first session of the new Galactic Assembly met on a neutral space station that humans had built specifically for this purpose. Hundreds of species attended. Some were former Concord members, now humbled and fearful. Many were species that had been oppressed for centuries, now standing as equals for the first time. All of them watched the human delegation with a mixture of awe and terror. Ambassador Choi Yuna stepped forward to address them. She was no longer the young lieutenant who had watched her crewmates die on the Evergreen. 5 years had passed since that terrible day. She had scars on her face and gray in her hair, but her eyes were still sharp and her voice was still steady. 300 years ago, she began, humanity came to the stars hoping to find friends. We found masters instead. We found species that looked at us and saw only tools to be used. We were mocked. We were exploited. We were murdered. And when we finally fought back, we discovered that you had been afraid of us all along. She paused to let her words sink in. You kept us weak because you feared what we might become. You caged us because you could not control us. And in the end, your fear created exactly what you were trying to prevent. The chamber was silent. Many of the aliens could not meet her eyes. We've won this war. We have destroyed the Concord. We could rule this galaxy through the same fear and force that was used against us. No one would stop us. After what we have done, no one could stop us. She looked across the chamber at the hundreds of species gathered there. Former enemies, former victims, potential friends. But that is not who we are. That is not who we want to become. She placed her hand over her heart, a human gesture of sincerity that many aliens had learned to recognize. We are not here to conquer. We are here to lead. Not through fear, but through the example we should have been allowed to set from the beginning. We are here to build something better than what came before. A galaxy where all species are equal, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them, where children are not murdered and called contamination. Admiral Beek Sung-ho watched the broadcast from Earth. He was 75 years old now. The war had aged him terribly. His hair was completely white, and he walked with a cane. But his mind was still sharp. Commander Shin De-jeon, now Admiral De-jeon, stood beside him. "Do you think they will accept it?" De-jeon asked. "After everything we have done to them." Sung-ho watched Yuna speaking on the screen. He saw the aliens listening. He saw some of them nodding. He saw others wiping tears from eyes that humans would not recognize as eyes. "Some will not," he admitted. "Some will hate us forever. Some will fear us until the end of time. That is the price we pay for what we have done." "Do you regret it?" Sung-ho was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we could not find another way. But I do not regret protecting our people. I do not regret showing the galaxy that humanity will not be slaughtered in silence." He turned to face De-jeon. "The real question is what comes next. The war is over. Now we have to prove that we are worthy of what we have won. Not through more violence. Through building, through creating, through being the species that helps others instead of hurting them. That sounds harder than fighting a war." Sung-ho smiled. "It will be, but it is the only way forward that does not lead to more darkness." 100 years later, the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. Humanity had kept its promise. They had not become tyrants. They had built schools on 1,000 worlds. They had shared technology with species that had nothing. They had created trade routes that brought prosperity to the poorest corners of space. They had stood against new threats and protected those who could not protect themselves. Not everything was perfect. There were still conflicts. There were still species who hated humans. There were still dark corners of the galaxy where justice had not reached. But the direction was clear. Things were getting better. On a distant world, far from Earth, a young alien student sat in a classroom. She was small, with purple skin and 4 eyes. Her species had been enslaved by the Concord for 3,000 years before humans had freed them. Now they were equal citizens of the Galactic Assembly. "Teacher," she asked, "why do humans have so much respect? They are not the oldest species. They are not the most advanced. But everyone listens when they speak. Why?" Her teacher was old, a member of a species that had once been part of the Concord. He had lived through the war. He had seen humanity rise from nothing to become the most influential species in known space. He thought carefully before answering. "Because they taught us the most important lesson," he said finally. "Cruelty awakens monsters, but mercy creates legends," pointed to the statue in the courtyard. It showed 847 names carved in stone. Humans who had died on a ship called Evergreen. The massacre that had changed everything. Humanity could have ruled through fear. They had the power. They had the right after what was done to them. But they chose differently. They chose to build instead of destroy. They chose to help instead of hurt. They chose to be better than those who had oppressed them. The young student looked at the statue. She did not fully understand what it meant. She was too young. She had not lived through those terrible times, but she remembered the lesson. And that is why the teacher continued. No one will ever forget the day humanity snapped. Not because of the destruction they caused, but because of the world they chose to create afterward. He looked up at the sky, where human ships moved peacefully among the stars. That is their true legacy. Not war, not revenge, hope.